Welcome back to The Shed. Mark Clifford co-authored the second Hugo Award-winning novel, but today I want to take a look at his 1961 novel, When They Came From Space. So I thought this was a really great book. So what I would like to do is provide a bit of a plot overview, talk to what I liked, what I didn't like, and I'll give it a rating. So I found this to be a very enjoyable read. The novel begins with the prologue that describes this interstellar galactic council who's been monitoring the galaxy for life. They stumble upon a little piece of the solar system and see life on Earth. They soon surmise that the fact that we've got fission and fusion power and interplanetary travel, we must be rational beings. So they send out the five, to survey the planet for a little bit more to see whether or not we're a threat or we can come into the galactic empire. And then we have a Mr. Ralph Kennedy, who just received a letter of acceptance for a staff psychologist role to deal with specializing in some kind of extraterrestrial vocational studies or some ridiculous government name. But the problem is that Ralph Kennedy is not the Dr. Ralph Kennedy that the letter is addressing. So he sort of sees this and says, hey, this is not me, you've got the wrong person. But that Defense Department will just not have any bar. They're saying, no, you are the Ralph Kennedy, the Dr. Ralph Kennedy, and you're going to take on this role, otherwise we're going to imprison you. And the novel then goes on to prove that humans are nothing but rational in a very witty, very comical way. I love the way Mark Clifford really looked at every aspect of society on Earth, and there was really no holds barred, and he just had to go at just about everything. Then we have this other main protagonist slash antagonist in this media tycoon, this rather huge media magnate who dictates public opinion via his newspapers. So he's got his hands in all aspects of life and is a really ruthless kind of person. He's really pent up on destroying just about anyone who's ever showed him up. So when the aliens do arrive in a very dramatic and spectacular fashion, only two men can see through the facade. We have Dr. Kennedy, who sort of realizes this is not all that appears to be. And then we have the media magnate who wants to use that to drive public opinion, and the scene is now set. Will Dr. Ralph Kennedy be made out? Will they discover that he's not the real Dr. Kennedy, even though he's trying to convince people right from the onset that he wasn't? And will public opinion be swayed by this evil media magnate to make a mockery of what's happening with the aliens? Are the aliens the real threat, or are they real the saviors? Are they really here to save planet Earth? All is to be revealed in this short little novel. I think it's about 150 odd pages. No, sorry, a little bit more than that. It's 190 pages, which sort of goes straight into my likes and dislikes section. So I found it, so what did I like? Look, I found it to be a very enjoyable read, right from the prologue to the very last sentence in the book. I just loved Mark Clifford's satirical and condescending view of humanity in many ways. And what was really enjoyable is that I was reading through this, and so many of what was happening in government and in the private sector just ranked so close to home. I just thought it was so satirical, so funny, and also so real, which I think is the real highlight of this novel. I wasn't expecting it, to be honest, and I was really pleasantly surprised. I always enjoy a first contact novel, and this one was a very interesting one at that, because, you know, right from the onset, right from the prologue, we know what the aliens want to do, that they're sort of investigating, trying to see if we can fit into the galactic empire. But it sort of does throw some really interesting questions there. And I really like the spin that Mark Clifford put on that first contact that I thought was very enjoyable. I don't want to talk too much about it because it was a highlight for me, and I don't want to give spoilers away here. But I highly recommend you read it. It's just, especially if you like those first contact type novels. So look, there wasn't much I really didn't enjoy in this novel. I enjoyed it from cover to cover, but I would have to say that I love this kind of comedy where it's taking the piss, right? If I can use that Australian phrase. It is very satirical, very much so tongue-in-cheek, and very sarcastic as well. I think that talks straight to Australian humour, and I think a lot of Australians will really enjoy this, as well as the UK. And to some extent, I think the US market will enjoy this as well. but it might be a bit of hit and miss for you guys, and I would love to hear your opinion, what you think of this kind of comedy, because I thought it was just absolutely great. I really did enjoy it, but I would have to say that it is a sense of humor that might not necessarily appeal to everyone, but I found it very much enjoyable. The other thing I would have to say is that, look, it's a 1961 novel by an author who is well and truly in his prime by then. Actually, he died several years after releasing this novel, unfortunately. So some of the views on women are a bit dated, and I wouldn't say it's as bad as I've seen in others of the time frame. Like, it's actually pretty decent, but it has got the typical women characters where they're sort of playing second fiddle. They're not really strong characters. They're really there to please the boss in the secretary and Sarah that we had there, and Shirley. So they're not very strong characters, but they're good supporting characters in what you'd expect in the 50s and 60s, but they were definitely not as bad as I've seen from other authors in that time. And also, like, this book holds nothing sacred, right? So it does really go out and tongue-in-cheek poke holes at just about everything, and that does include racial types, stereotypes, and it also includes some religious beliefs as well, right? It's not over the top, but it's definitely there, and some people would call that dated, I suspect. But look, it didn't really take away from my enjoyment at all. I was only really looking at, well, what can I talk to that some people may find a bit, not necessarily offensive, but not necessarily to their liking. So that were the only two things that I sort of found in the book that sort of, yeah, maybe this is something, right? But it definitely didn't take away from my overall enjoyment. I thoroughly enjoyed it, which takes me straight into my rankings and ratings. Now, Mark Clifton did win a Hugo Award. He co-authored, I can't remember who the second author was, for They'd Rather Be Right. So we'll be reviewing that novel in an upcoming shared video. But I'd have to say I enjoyed this novel a lot more than I did They'd Rather Be Right. And I've neglected Mark Clifford for some time, so I'm glad I found this in one of the recent book haul videos that I did. And when I saw it, I thought I'll have to give this a go, because I shouldn't rule out Mark Clifford altogether. And I'm really glad I didn't. I really thoroughly enjoyed this one, if it's not obvious enough already. So look, when it comes to recommendations, similar novels that I've read and covered to date on the Shed Ladder will be Kurt Vonnegut's Cat's Cradle. Where that one I found was a bit of dark humor, this one is not, I would say, dark humor. It's a bit more light humor, a little bit more tongue-in-cheek, and more obviously tongue-in-cheek, and definitely a lot more condescending of human nature. And it really, like I said, it really goes to prove or disprove that humans are rational beings, right? It's just very, very entertaining read. I would say the other recommendations are, first contact novels. If you like your first contact alien novels, this is in that league, but I think it does give you that new fresh take on just how ridiculous sometimes humans can be, and what would aliens, when visiting the planet, think of us as a society. How would they portray themselves, which is really the theme of the book, is how would aliens portray themselves viewing our archives, our art, our movies? How would they portray themselves to us to prove themselves to be the good guys? And it's just very, very entertaining. So when it comes to rankings, we're not going to rank it on our Sci-Fi Shed Ladder, because I've been exclusively leaving that for the Hugo and Nebula Award-winning novels. So if you haven't seen one of those videos in the past, I highly recommend you have a look at my Nebula and Hugo playlist, where I've been ranking all these novels. But as a rating, look, I'd rate this one a good 4 out of 5. I found it a very enjoyable read. I can't stress it enough. And it was a very fast read as well. But there you have it, a very thoroughly enjoyable read. Mark Clifford's When They Came From Space, one that I think you owe it to yourself just to see perhaps what I saw in it, which is a bit of a tongue-in-cheek, bit of taking the piss out of Australians, I was going to say. But it could very well hold true for Australians as well, but for the world at large. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you next time in the shed.